So, The Empire Strikes Back, the second Star Wars film in the franchise, hit theaters the year I graduated from college. It was in that episode that we first met Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructs the young Luke Skywalker in using the Force that flows within him. The training, if you remember, takes place in a swamp where Yoda put him through many physical and mental challenges. At the end of the day, they stop near a large dead tree. And Luke says, "There's something not right here. I feel cold, death." Yoda points his stick to a dark, foggy cave formed by the deep roots of the dead tree and says, "That place is strong with the dark side of the Force. A domain of evil it is. In you must go." "What's in there?" Luke asks. Yoda responds, "Only what you take with you." Luke starts to strap on his weapons, and Yoda continues, "Your weapons, you will not need them." Luke takes them anyway and goes in, lowering himself through the roots into the mire below when the snake comes out and there's all these creepy things in there. Soon we hear the machine breathing of Darth Vader, who appears quickly. They each draw their lightsabers. Nothing is said, and in a few quick strokes, Luke decapitates Vader, whose helmeted head rolls to one side. As the camera focuses there on the helmet, the outer helmet explodes to reveal the face inside. And it's the face of young Luke himself. Luke is a combination of baffled and horrified, as is the audience, as we both realize that we have witnessed not a real battle, but a kinetic vision that is somehow part of Luke's training with Yoda. At 21 years old, I had no mental map to help me make sense of that scene inside the cave. It was years before I even began to understand what on earth that encounter was about. Of course, part of the meaning is revealed at the end of the movie as we learn that Darth Vader is in fact Luke's father. But there was more to the scene than just foreshadowing that surprise in the plot. The severed helmet of Darth Vader doesn't turn into Luke's father's face. It turns into Luke's own face. What? Online forums were full of fans trying to figure it out, talking about it amongst themselves. As I look back now, over 40 years and quite a few additional Star Wars movies later, I see that the entire Star Wars franchise explores the theme of how dangerous it is to think that monsters are somehow other. We see many, many others in Star Wars. Creatures from other worlds, and they might be friendly or dangerous or neutral in terms of their behavior and intentions. You can pull up a stool at the cantina and have a planetary brew with a whole bunch of them. But the series revolves around the conflicts both between and within human characters, showing us in mythic language that monsters have their origins within us, all of us. Luke has to enter the cave before he can fight the real Darth Vader, not to learn to better wield his lightsaber, and not even to prepare him for the possibility that there might be a family connection to his enemy. The message that Luke needed to absorb was that without having full awareness of his own nature, he could easily become Darth Vader. The danger lay not without, but within. The thing that could save Luke from his father's fate was not his skill with a weapon, but his ability to remain in control of his choices. Yoda told Luke he would not need a weapon in the cave. He took one anyway and killed Vader, only to discover that in doing so, he had become the monster and killed himself. Test failed. George Lucas didn't invent the idea that people could turn into monsters. It's been around in monster lore for millennia, from the werewolves of Europe to the Wendigo of central Canada to transformations pictured in Paleolithic caves in France, proclaiming that normal people can turn into monsters. But we don't need mythology or horror stories to tell us that. Apart from those who do monstrous things because of brain abnormalities or other kinds of illness, psychological studies have shown us that even when test subjects are screened to make sure that nobody in the study is a closet psychopath or sadist, normal, decent people can turn into monsters in very short order when the circumstances are right. In 1961 at Yale, it only took a few minutes for Stanley Milgram to convince decent men between 20 to 50 years old to administer what the test subjects believed to be fatal electric shocks to someone in another room. They were just following orders and continued to do so despite hearing cries of pain and screams and then silence from the other room. Some continued to press that button nervously, but when the authority figure beside them told them they needed to do it, the overwhelming majority of those normal test subjects pressed the button and did it. A decade later at Stanford, the U.S. Office of Naval Research founded a study that put college students, again carefully screened, into a role-playing exercise where the students were randomly divided into prison guards and prisoners. The study was designed to last for 2 weeks to measure the effects of role-playing, labeling, and social expectations on behavior. But the abuse of the student prisoners grew so extreme that they had to end the experiment after just 6 days. 3 of the prisoners were so traumatized after just 4 days that they had to be released from the experiment altogether. The first thing that all of this teaches us is that yes, people can and regularly do turn into monsters. It is not a modern development. It's a truth captured in both story and real-life observation across time and culture. Further, those transformations don't just happen to bad people or mentally ill people or people who were themselves abused or traumatized as children. Any and all people are capable of horrible things. We are especially bad at recognizing this in the church. There is no religion on the planet that hasn't seen its adherents turn into monsters. Many lay the blame for that on religion itself and believe we can eradicate monsters from the world if we just get rid of all religion. Certainly, critics of religion have some fodder for that argument. There are many examples to draw from to make that case. And it's true that the corporate nature of religion can easily take an individual monster and let it metastasize through the body to become a destroyer of worlds. But the same happens when a monstrous individual is elevated to lead a different kind of corporate entity, a nation, or an empire, or a trillion-dollar business, irrespective of whether or not they practice a religion. The problem, I would argue, is not the religion. We keep making the mistake of thinking that the monster is somehow other, that it is to be found out there, that it lies within bad people and not within good people. And if it emerges in someone we have already labeled as good, it's proof only that the person is a hypocrite, that the pastor or priest who ended up abusing children was somehow not a real Christian, for example. Real Christians wouldn't do such things, as if faith is some kind of magical elixir that makes us immune from our worst impulses. That is exactly the trap that allows the monster inside to take hold. Our belief that we are good and therefore it could not possibly happen to us. Even the most devout, sincere Christian does not have some kind of magical immunity, even if they've got a wand. And believing we do leaves a wide opening for the monster within to emerge. Turning into a monster is a possibility for every human, including every one of us in this room. We deny that possibility at our peril. We don't have to look far to discover that in ourselves. Every time we struggle to do the right thing, every time we kick ourselves and say, "Why did I say that? I know better," we have a chance to recognize that the very reason we struggle is because there is a part of us that finds it easier or more satisfying to do the wrong thing, even when we know it's going to cause us trouble. If that inner monster didn't exist, we would never find doing the right thing hard. It's even in our language. What's another term for jealousy? The green-eyed monster. Our individual monsters have differing characteristics. You might have a red-eyed monster or a gold-starred-eyed monster. But all of us have some areas of life where we find it harder to do what we know is good and helpful and right. And that's exactly the struggle that St. Paul is dealing with in the passage from Romans 7 that Kathy read earlier. He wrestles with his dilemma openly for all of us to see. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. I can will what I want, but I cannot do it, he says. Paul's inner monster is trying to gain the upper hand. Now, Paul is one of the most strong-willed characters in the entire Bible. He perseveres through hardships that turn back any and all others. He follows his mission through any and all obstacles, despite deprivation, threats, prison, and right up to his execution by one of history's monsters, the Roman Emperor Nero. If doing the right thing were simply a matter of willpower, Paul would be perfect. Few are the people who have more willpower than Paul of Tarsus. But even with all of that, even with a dramatic and life-altering conversion and hearing the voice of Jesus himself on the Damascus Road, even when teaching and wholeheartedly believing in the way of the cross, Paul is still unable to do the things that he knows he should. And he shares it with the whole church in Rome in this letter because he knows he is not the only one. He is telling the Roman church the same truth that Luke was supposed to learn in that cave. There is a monster looking for opportunities to emerge in all of us. Darth Vader was himself a kindly father named Anakin Skywalker once. Being a person of faith or containing the power of the Jedi does not grant some kind of magical immunity from sin, even monstrous sin. Keeping the monster in check is not a matter of mustering more willpower or more firepower. We'll talk more about what it does take next week, but that won't help unless we first muster the courage to enter our own cave and come to grips with the fact that neither the kingdom of God nor the monster is out there. They both lie side by side, saint and sinner, hero and monster within us. Which of those things becomes manifest in our outward lives is our choice, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. Luke doesn't notice the cave until the intensity of the day is done. As he starts to wind down, he notices that something is off. If we're willing to look for our own cave, we need only to take a quiet moment and notice the inner struggle to which Paul gives voice, in whatever form that takes in us, and then sit with that other voice for a bit, unarmed. Oh my goodness, that was a really ugly thought I just had. That very recognition can be the beginning of salvation. My first cave moment came a little more than a decade after I had witnessed Luke's cave moment on the big screen. I was 32 years old. My husband had just filed for divorce so that he could be with another woman, and I was dizzy with emotion, questions, and a need to address some very practical problems very quickly. Added to that, I felt constrained by things my faith taught me I should or shouldn't do in response to what was happening. And I felt trapped by those shoulds, angry at a lot of people and things, and scared for my future. I still remember, and as I tell you this, those who were in the early Sunday school class this morning remember the safe discussion. But I still remember exactly where I was sitting when it dawned on me that while I had some difficult problems to solve, I was not, in fact, trapped. I still had choices in how I could respond, even though I wasn't really fond of my options. And then, up from the very depths of my psyche came the thought, well, actually, I could kill him. I could easily go out, buy a gun, and I could kill him. Wait, what? I was aghast. That's not who I am. That's the opposite of who I am. Where did that thought come from? Like I said, I remember where I was sitting in my house. There's something not right here, I thought. I'd seen Star Wars a bazillion times by then, so the answer naturally followed. That place is strong with the dark side of the Force. A domain of evil it is. In you must go. Unlike Luke, however, I followed Yoda's advice to enter unarmed. And it was kind of a choice, but I just didn't have it in me to fight. I was already too broken to put up a defense, too strained from the effort of trying to save a marriage that could not be saved. Is this forbidding cave going to be my undoing? Maybe. At that moment, that would have been fine too, actually. I remembered learning from a criminal psychology book that murder was an extroverted suicide. I went in and down. And there at the bottom, I met the monster who was suggesting that I betray everything I stood for and believed. You could kill him, it said again, like it was picking a paint color for the living room. That is a real choice that you have. If I'd allowed smoking, it would have lit up a cigar. Well, sure, I said, but it's not the only choice that I have. And it's not the choice I want to make. First off, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. I've already got enough problems, thank you. But also, that's not the kind of person that I want to be. I became a Christian intentionally, remember, because I believe the values of Jesus are ultimately the best way to live. And thou shalt not kill is right up there on that list. I have freely chosen to bind myself to those values. Okay, said the monster, just checking. And it was over. I came out of that cave exhausted, but weirdly, newly liberated, hopeful even. I was still the actor in my own life. I was not trapped. I could choose. If I had gone into that cave with a weapon to find the monster and beat it back, or if I'd refused to engage it at all, I would still have been trapped and angry. I still would have made the same choice, but I wouldn't have realized that it was a choice. Oh, I have to do this because my faith says I have to do this, and I'm mad and I want to kill him, but I had to face it. And if I had ignored it, shoved it back, pushed it down, beaten it down, that monster would have found other destructive ways to emerge in my life. But I had nothing else to lose at that point. So I looked it straight in the eye and explained to it, and therefore to myself, that I was choosing the response that matched my faith. And from that minute onward, I was able to make other good choices in that bad situation without ever feeling resentful or trapped. Entering the cave to meet our inner monster feels terrifying, especially if we've been taught to see people as either all good or all bad. In that worldview, admitting that those darker impulses are actually part of us would shove us into the category of, oh, now I'm a bad person. And our psyche can't handle that. The problem with that binary belief is at the heart of the horror story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you've heard two musical performances this morning from the musical about that story. The good Dr. Jekyll is so ashamed of the vice he finds inside himself that he develops a facade. He lives a good life in public and he indulges his vices in private. But then the fear of having his evil side discovered and his reputation ruined, getting put in the category of a bad person, leads him to develop a potion to physically switch himself back and forth from the upstanding Dr. Jekyll to the violent and evil Mr. Hyde in a new form that others wouldn't recognize and know it's him. By allowing and even enabling Mr. Hyde to emerge in public in a different form from Dr. Jekyll, he allows the evil Mr. Hyde to grow more powerful. And finally, the day comes when the potion doesn't work anymore. Dr. Jekyll can't change back to his good self. The jig is up, and Mr. Hyde is in full control. But because they are, in fact, the same person, the only option left for what is now the inner Dr. Jekyll, who can't get out, is to direct his shame in full force at Mr. Hyde, turning that murderous impulse on himself in a suicide. The body of Mr. Hyde is found wearing the clothing of Dr. Jekyll, the good doctor nothing more than a crumbled facade. Hardly a day goes by in today's news that we don't read of public figures, from clergy to CEOs to politicians, who bring ruin upon themselves through exactly that same process. Like Dr. Jekyll, they have a public persona that can't bear the shame of facing their shadow side, and it begins to act out in private. So they wall it off, where it grows until they can't contain it anymore. And then we all suffer in the wreckage of what their Mr. Hyde has unleashed. And eventually, it becomes their ruin as well. We will look at Paul's solution to his Romans 7 problem in depth next week. But for today, I'll close with a poem called The Guest House by the 13th century Sufi poet and mystic Rumi. Rumi's wisdom describes what the cave encounter can look like once we learn not to fear what we might find inside. He writes, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond."
Society's way, and the truth is that it's all a facade. There's a face that behind till the nighttime appears, and what's hiding inside behind all of our fears is the true self locked inside the facade. Every day, people in their own sweet way like to add a coat of paint and be what they hate. That's how a little game is played, living like a masquerade, lighting up bizarre charade while playing the saint. But there's one thing I know, and I know it for sure. This disease that we've got has got no getting cure. It was terribly hard when your life's a facade. So this is sinister secret. The lie they will tell you is true, is that each one you meet in the street isn't one, but two. At the end of the day, they don't mean what they say, they don't say what they think, they don't ever complain. And the answer is all a facade. It is all a facade. And he's nothing but two. He is evil and good, and he wants to live on the oppressed.